All right, we are live, and I thank you so much for listening. I am William Wallace, as I like to start all of my shows and my podcasts. If you know the movie, you know the reference. And as you all know, went to CPAC a couple weeks ago, and I met a ton of candidates. And as you know, one of my favorite things to do is interview candidates. Why? In case you haven't heard it before, because I find candidates are the most passionate about not only their ideas, but about our country, and they have the most energy to try to solve problems in our country and their communities. So with me today is Kimberly Lowe, running for U.S. Congress in Virginia. Kimberly, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on. It was so great meeting you at CPAC. We had the best time.
We did. I tell you what, you're one of my favorite people to meet there. You're friendly, you're personable, and passionate about your ideas at the same time. And I just really, that's why I was compelled to bring you on the show, because I think
Thank you.
when people share what you've got to say, I think it's set an example of kind of what we need for other candidates.
Thank you. Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about yourself there. You've got some kids from your website. You've been in business. Tell people some of the story you told me.
I'm a single mom and a farmer. For years, I've also worked on policy to strengthen our families, because there's a lot of policy hurting our families. And this has been happening for decades. And far too often, a lot of legislators don't really think about the family. So I've been working with legislators at the state and federal level to work on policy that would really help our families out.
So being a single mom and being a farmer and being basically, you think of farmers, you think of Midwest when you think of farmers, but you're in Virginia.
I'm in Virginia, so I've got hay fields, cattle, horses, goats, and sheep, pretty much. In Virginia, smaller farmers diversify.
Okay.
And agriculture is pretty big here.
So you've got not only a good feel for farming in Midwestern and more rural area, but it's that Americana type feel, if you will.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm a salt of the earth kind of gal.
Well,
I think I'm a fireball in farm boots.
A fireball and what do you say?
Yeah, fireball in farm boots.
I love it. And salt of the earth. Well, you do seem like a real down to earth person. That's kind of why I like I said, I enjoyed meting with you. And it's even come across now.
One of the biggest things I learned about politics is how dishonest people are. I had no idea. I was raised to be honest.
Yeah.
And I still am. And it's just every day you're coming across so many bad people.
Yeah.
I had no idea that people were that dishonest, but I guess it's how they're playing the game, and that's really sad, because playing the game should be about helping people and saving our country.
Well, right? I like what you say on your website. Politics should be about helping people and making people's lives better. Correct. And that a vote for you is a vote for for family and your community. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I like to say, a piece that's what I like to say a lot of, is that, I wanted to save our country. One of my missions with my Facebook page and my radio show was to find ways to unite our country and save our country. Mm-hmm. But I've quickly found that the best way to do that is to start in our own communities. And so when you talk about community, that really hits a nail on the head for me.
There's so much work that can be done at the community level, but it takes more than people on the ground in the community. It's going to take policy to have real change and policy fixes to help people. And I think I'm a dangerous candidate for the left and the right, because I want people to work.
Yeah, we've lost your sound a little bit there. I know you. All right. Well, I'll talk for a minute while people can still hear me. Is your mic? All right, we've lost Kimberly there for a minute, but what I'll do is she'll probably log on here in just a minute or back on. But, as everybody knows, I love bringing on our candidates, because candidates are really one of the best ways, I feel, who have the most passion for our country. And they're certainly some of the people that are, they're firebrands, as she said. Here we are, we got her back. There we
I'm
go.
back. I'm so sorry. Everything froze.
That's
But you
okay.
still see me?
That's quite all right. So so back to where you talk about the problems and the dishonesty. You know,
Yeah.
what's interesting is I'm lucky enough that being, you know, an hour away from our capital, I spend a lot of time there, and I work, and because I really believe that some of the biggest problems can be fixed in our own communities, we do that through the legislature, and I've been fortunate to meet, you know, just about everybody at the Capitol, and we've got a lot of really good people that kind of work together. They've, you know, their ideologies sometimes differ, but you know, they come together a whole lot more
Mhm.
than they do in DC, which is what I think you're alluding more about the DC.
Yeah, there's so much manipulation to try to divide America, and the reality is that we love our families, we love our communities, and a lot of times at the local people, um, at the local level, it's nonpartisan and people work together. But we have big tech and media that has really been taken over for decades, and it wants to divide people and tell Americans a false narrative. And as long as we are fighting and divided, we will never be powerful or be able to solve our problems. We're just going to be running on a hamster wheel, always with violence and division. And that's why it's going to be so important to rein in big tech and media, because they are really a huge culprit of division in this country. And I think I'm a dangerous candidate for the left and the right, because people don't want to come together. Both sides are believing completely false narratives. And I do, however, think that the left is being told a lot of extremely false narratives, and they're using that to put out a lot of hate against people. So I think both sides feel a lot of hate.
Well,
And
it's interesting. You're saying something a little bit different than the way I say it, but it's kind of on the same mindset. You know, I find that it's the far right and the far left that divides up most Americans. And when I talk to people on my show, and of course people running for office, and I talk to a lot of Democrats. I find that even most Democrats and most Republicans actually agree on more than what we're led to believe that we agree on. It really
correct.
is the far right and the far left that are creating narratives. Now, you know, because you know I'm on, you know, of course I lean to the right. You know, you know, I'm definitely on the right side of the fence. You know, I tend to look, well, where are those far right people that are dividing us? So you know, it's hard to see it when you're on the right. It takes a lot of extra work to find it,
Hmm.
but, you know, there is a far right that's dividing us up, you
Yeah,
know, and
yeah.
I agree with
Well,
you. And far left, I don't know that it's big tech. I think big tech is just a tool that's being used by, you know, the far left and even some of the far right to divide us up because of its mouthpiece.
the reality is that we've got to come together if we're going to save our country. And a
I
lot
agree
of people are
100%.
leaving the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party used to be the party of the working class. Now it really is not any longer, and there are people looking for a new place to go. So I'd really like to see the Republican Party, and I it's really the new Republican Party, which is more
Mhm.
kind of composed of Trump supporters at this point. I think that's a slightly different variety and taste and flavor of conservatism. Um, and we need to open up our arms to people and bring them in
It's gonna be
when they're
really
ready to. Hmm?
No, it's to be really interesting to see what happens next couple of years. But I agree with you 100% is in that I think the Republican Party's messaging could be improved to bring more people in under the tent, so to speak.
Yeah,
But
I
that's
mean,
a topic.
I've struggled in the party. There's a large portion of the party still that wants to keep it small, keep their power, and they don't want to allow people into the party. So it's always been a struggle to have a seat at the table. No one ever pat me on the back. I stuck with it. I've worked really hard in Virginia. I've helped with mayor races, overturning city councils, worked on the governor's, lieutenant governor's, and attorney general's race. I've worked on House of Delegates races. And then I've done a lot of work at the community level, and that requires bipartisan work. You know, the Democrats and the Republicans are working together at that level. And that's the way it should be. We should be able to say, hey, there's a problem, let's work on it to fix it instead of calling each other names, and let's go get the work done. And
You know
that's
what?
my plan. I want people to come together and we're going to go get the work done.
Mhm. I like what you're saying there. I always tell people this. Ideologically, I'm on the right side of the fence, but I also have enough common sense and intelligence to see that sometimes Democrats have decent ideas. I do not, but the Democrats are different from that far left. The leftists, the people that are almost borderline communist in some people's opinion. So there's a difference here. I just want to define that a little bit so people that listen to us don't go, well, they're just being complicit, and we're not.
You're frozen. Gosh. All right. You know what? I'm going to change my settings because you're frozen and see if that helps. Lost you.
There you are.
Sorry, I don't know. It crashed.
Not sure what's happening there.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. That's quite all right. Look, you're in a hotel. You're on the road. You're running. You're running for office. You're in some hotel.
Got a
And
lot of counties to cover.
Virginia.
Exactly. A lot of ground.
What's that?
A lot of ground to cover. A lot of counties. Big area, very rural, large area.
Again, you're rural. You're in some hotel that's in a rural area, so I'm sure that's why your internet spot you. That's all. Let's ahead and see if we can make sure it works all this time.
Thanks.
So now let's talk about a couple things. I'm looking at your issues. You've got inflation on your website. What do you have to say about that?
We would not be at this place right now if we were energy independent. It wouldn't have jacked up the price of gas. And then, I mean, the price of gas has contributed to our supply chain breaking down, not being able to afford food. Inflation has also contributed to what's happening with the central bank. They have allowed way too many loans at a really low interest rate, and we're going to have to diversify that. There's a lot of solutions to this inflation, but Biden's really poor policies to try to suppress the access to energy has led to this crisis that we're in. And I think that their goal is to make it appear as if fossil fuels are not affordable. But in reality, we're still using the amount of fossil fuels. We're just getting it from elsewhere. So that's absolutely ridiculous. And it's a fixable situation. We have a horrible, horrible administration.
Isn't it amazing that this same administration that's against fossil fuels and they're that pro global warming idea that we have to get rid of fossil fuels. Yet we're still using the same amount. That's a great point, Kim. We're still
Yes,
using
thank
the same
you.
amount. It's just that we're not getting it. We're not getting it from our own store, and we're getting
Yeah,
we're giving
that's
our money to somebody else.
that's my point with coal. We have here in Southwest Virginia, we have some of the finest quality of coal. Yet we're buying our coal from other countries, and the people in deep Southwest Virginia who grew up in a coal mining tradition don't have jobs. And we've got to really take a look at reclaiming the mines, and we need to make sure that these mines are not being bought up by companies that are from overseas. The coal mines we have left are not really owned locally. They're also owned by people from other countries. So there's
See,
a
now
lot of reclaiming we have to do.
that's some interesting information, Kim. I got to tell you, no one's ever talked about that on my show before.
Mm-hmm.
Which, and you don't think about this. I've actually talked about how our farmland across the country is being
Correct.
bought up by foreign countries. But you're telling me that our coal mining, our coal
Correct.
mines are being bought up by foreign countries right now?
Correct. And not only that, as far as beef is concerned, I mean, I have beef cattle. There are four main meat processors in America, all owned by China. And it may not necessarily be a policy fix, but all of our communities need to take a good look at investing into meat processing facilities, because what's happening with the cost of meat currently is that the processor is not giving the farmer the amount of money that the
Right.
farmer deserves. Then they're jacking up the price at market. So
Right.
everyone is getting hurt except for the business owner, the Chinese. We're going to have a really serious food crisis, in my opinion, over the next year. And we need to start preparing for it. And we need to start diversifying and making sure that our communities have food access. One of my solutions for that is greenhouses. I'm working with someone who has an incredible business plan to bring in greenhouses. It brings in a large number of good paying jobs, and it's a nice job. I mean, I would enjoy time working in a greenhouse, compared to a lot of other jobs. And that's something that is sustainable for decades. We can get fresh food into our communities because a lot of places are food deserts. Right now, with the price of fuel and our supply chain being broken down, you wouldn't have to rely on that so much to have food. And a lot of places have really low area health outcomes. And we need to make sure that we get fresh food on the table. There really is just not the food access that we need.
What's interesting, like you're pointing out, like we talked about before, is we're talking about not only the foreign countries buying up the coal mines, and I was talking earlier about how foreign countries are buying up our farmland.
Correct.
It does make the point that and with our major our meat processors are foreign owned. It does make the point that what happens in years to come. Now you say a year, I'm saying years to come, when if our farms are now owned by foreign countries, and
Mm-hmm.
people, because it's conspiracy thinking, but you look it up. Actually, there's been two reports. There was a local news reporter here in Louisiana that made this story, and I've seen a national one too. And they're talking about how many foreign countries are buying up our farmland, which is going to
Correct.
hurt our own food supply. And why aren't
So,
members doing something about that?
yeah, so Bill Gates Foundation also owns a large amount of farmland.
Mhm.
Um, the Chinese have bought up a lot. Before the Chinese, the Japanese bought up a lot. And I think it's because it's a free market enterprise that it hasn't been challenged or discussed. I've met with the National Cattlemen's Association regarding this issue, and there aren't really clear answers except that it's really a free market enterprise. And
It's
I think it
interesting.
needs to be addressed at this point.
I do too. I think it should be Americans should be able to, Americans should be able to buy American land, not foreign countries. I get the free
Mhm.
market enterprise, and it's a whole other story for another day. But because I want to focus on you today,
Mhm.
but we'll bring up all these issues because I do
Mhm.
talk about them on my show regularly. But also the meat processing plants. I was at a farmer's market the other day talking to a guy that was selling. He's a rancher. He sells. He raises cows, and he also has has, I don't know, relatives, a butcher, and they sell their own meat and beef. And he says,
Mhm.
yeah, he says people don't realize that what you're buying in the store is almost always processed out of the country.
Yeah, yeah.
Case it here, they ship it out of the country, and then the foreign countries ship it back. So how do we know how much of that is really our beef coming back to us and not somebody else's beef or an inferior product?
Yeah, yeah. We do have a lot of meat coming from other countries as well.
I love this picture that by Constitutional Rights on your website. I looked down for a brief minute. I love that AR. That's pretty darn cool.
Thank
That,
you. Well, I mean, I think just being with guns is natural, and I hate seeing pictures of candidates when they are posing with the gun. And that was me actually shooting on a hot, sweaty day, and
yeah,
that's real life. It's actually a good stress reliever, but
got you in a pretty dress, your makeup on,
yeah, that's
holding
just
your AR.
doesn't work.
It's
No,
actually out there shooting at the range.
correct, correct. Yeah, or on the farm anyway. It's a good
So
stress
how do you
reliever.
obviously you feel pretty strongly about our Second Amendment rights.
Yeah, there are so many false narratives that Americans have been taught. I really think that the NRA and other organizations need to take on an education and awareness campaign on guns, because the American people have been lied to regarding gun violence at a large scale. They have been lied to. And this is really a long term plan to make sure that we are not armed so that way they can take our freedoms. They took our religion, they overtook our media, they took over our schools.
How have they taken our religion?
What'd you say?
How have they taken our religion?
Oh goodness, well, they started taking God out of everything decades ago.
Okay.
We've been on a multi-decade long path to remove our freedoms, and everyone was so busy trying to survive that they missed it. And now people are waking up to say something is wrong. Our children are being indoctrinated. Our history is being removed. Our history is being changed in books. It's really the brainwashing of people in order to control them. And America is the last stand, and we are at the last hour. And that's why we don't need quiet candidates in. We need some people with some fire who are going to go up there and fight.
And that's what I've always said about how I like the candidates the most, because not only are they the most vigorous, the most energetic, and the most passionate about their ideas, but I'll tell people, like, sometimes this is interesting. Sometimes I'll have friends come to me and they'll say, that person didn't have a chance, or this person doesn't have a chance, and you brought them on your show, and they're one of those fringe candidates. They have these crazy ideas. They'll never win. And I tell people, I say, well, you know what? If that's the way you feel, it's fine. It's not necessarily that I feel differently, but I feel passionately about bringing on people who are going to try to bring in some fresh blood,
Thank
if
you.
you will, and not in a violent way. I mean, fresh blood of their own blood. I mean, because you're putting up your own time, your own money, your own blood, sweat, and tears, if you will, to run this campaign. And even if a candidate in this case, like yourself, were not to win, they bring a lot more enthusiasm. They motivate people to get more involved, and not only motivate people, they bring in ideas, sometimes that people have never thought of, or they resurrect ideas that people keep forgetting about.
I
And
agree. I think that candidates drive ideas and they always make the incumbent much better. And people don't realize the amount of work and sacrifice and time that candidates have to put in. I mean, we've sacrificed so much, but it's what we have to do at this point. I couldn't just sit at home on the couch. I mean, we've really given up so
Mhm.
much, but we have to at this point.
And you don't have to give the name. I'm not asking for the name, but you are running against not only an incumbent but an establishment person, I think.
Correct, correct. I'm running against someone who's a 27-year-long career politician. He's been in the House. It'll be for 12 years.
Wait, what, for 12
And the
years?
reality is that he
What
doesn't understand how to problem solve.
what for
So
12
if you
years?
can't see the problem and you don't have a solution to the problem, then you're never going to write policy to get it fixed. And people are suffering. I have people without jobs, extreme addiction issues. They're losing their children through the government, CPS, tyranny, child welfare system. And a lot of this is so fixable. And so it's time for him to move over. The people in my district cannot wait a couple more years for someone to swoop in and give them opportunity and quality of life and give them a voice and have someone who's really going to fight for them. I mean, it takes compassion and dedication and an understanding of the problems to come in and do this. And I'm going to do everything I can to win this seat. June 21st is my primary.
I'm going to back way up. You said he'd been in office for 27 years, and then you had said something about 12 years. What was the 12
Yep.
years?
So he's been in the U.S. House. It'll be for 12 years.
Okay.
But
But
I mean, he's an ineffective policymaker. Everyone on the Hill knows it. You know, people in DC are following me closely. They want me in as well because they're sick of politicians who are not brave enough to speak out. You know, I met with the Heritage Foundation on Monday, met with a lot of different policy experts and advisors. And one of the complaints that I heard is that you have politicians in. They get called a name like racist and they go cower underneath their couch or under their chair, and they're not fighting for the policy that we need. So I'm not going to be the quiet one.
I'm seeing that quite often there.
Yeah.
But that's like I said, that's the other part of this is that a lot of people get behind the incumbent because they have the name and then they have a new person come along and they say, well, they're not really experienced, they don't have the name, and then the other person has the money, and that's why a lot of grassroots candidates like yourself end up not winning or become air quote the fringe candidates because you're passionate about your ideas and people, and sometimes that when that passion comes out, people think of it as either conspiracy or the crazy person, and the person that is establishment, they don't have to say anything because they can just
Yeah.
be
Well,
the
I
money.
think our campaign's going to surprise them. You know, you can't act like you own your seat. It's the people's seat,
Right.
and we're coming for it, and we're giving it back to the people.
And I'm saying these things for a reason because I want people to think more about looking at alternative candidates, not necessarily because of they have a different way of thinking, but well, some of that's true, I guess, but simply because they bring not only fresh blood but fresh enthusiasm. They get more people involved, and even if that other candidate, that alternative candidate, loses, they actually make the other candidate, like you said, a better candidate sometimes.
Correct. You know, the border wasn't important until I was at the border. Go figure. All of
Right.
a sudden, the border became important.
Well, there's a picture of you at the border on your website. Let's talk
Yeah.
about
Yeah,
that.
okay. So it's basically a military zone. It's an invasion in this country. We are spending a lot of money when we can't even take care of our own problems in America. It's estimated that possibly 5 million people came over just over the last year, around 2 million attempted entry. And what makes no sense is that the majority of Border Patrol are processing paperwork instead of out there processing people. Because of this open border policy, you may have two Border Patrol officers along a 66-mile route of the Rio Grande, and they are just going out, catching, processing, putting them on a government bus, and going back out. In the meantime, who knows how many others have come through? I mean, here's my thing: the opioid epidemic is the number one killer in America. It is destroying the communities in Southwest Virginia. It's destroying the communities in our nation, and we're not talking about it. And it is a matter of closing our border off. So we've got to get some people in Congress with some balls to pass some pretty simple policy to deal with this. I will tell you that a couple people who are involved with this open border policy are no longer in the Biden administration. It's my understanding that the wall is being built. Some people on the Democrat side are not happy about Biden doing that. The wall does not necessarily stop them from coming in. It just slows them down and gives
Wait, you said the
Border
wall
Patrol
is
time.
still being built?
Yeah. So, for one thing, Governor Abbott has a different design. He
I got
is currently building, but also, according to my intel in Mexico, Biden is continuing the border wall. So, but that's just down south intel. Um, so, I mean, these are measures that have to happen, and what people on the left need to understand that this is not humanitarian. If you have to go through the Dorian Gap, where you're probably going to be murdered or raped, and then you make your way all the way up to the north of Mexico, where you are indebted to the cartel forever, and you become a drug mule coming across, or you have to give your baby or small child a deadly dose of Zoloft so they're quiet when they're crossing. So many people over the last year have died, they have drowned, they've been murdered. This is not a humane way. If you're going to have an open border policy, there needs to be a better way, but we don't need an open border. The reality is that large numbers of people from over 150 different countries are coming for economic reasons, not for asylum. But there's a lot of little things that can be fixed to work on this. And well, I think a lot of this still needs to be a bigger decision at the presidential level. There's still bits of policy that can change what's happening right now. And Americans need to realize that we're paying for this.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of them that come through the Darien Gap end up at the Guatemala Mexico border. The United Nations is funding them until they are bused by the Mexican government to the north of Mexico. We are funding the United Nations. When they come in, we are taking care of their needs. They are getting money per month. We're paying for them. We're shipping them out all across the nation. This is affecting everyone, everyone here. People need to realize this. This is a huge issue. In the past, before the open border policy, it was said that 20% of all of our neighborhoods were trafficked people from the border. I cannot imagine what those numbers must be right now and what that business is with sex trafficking. So
And
it
what's
is a humanitarian crisis,
what's
and we can't even take care of our homeless or our veterans, but we're taking care of the rest of the world, not because they're seeking asylum, but because they're coming here for economic reasons.
What's interesting is that I remember that it used to be the Democrat narrative. They would say things like, "Oh, they're only coming here for a better life. They're coming here for a better home. They're coming here for asylum." And you don't hear that as often anymore because now that the facts and the statistics are showing that human trafficking and drug trafficking have now or actually that human trafficking has surpassed drug trafficking, and those two statistics have overcome the searching for a better life narrative. People can't argue why people are coming here. They're realizing it's for human trafficking and drugs. And that's, as we know now, fentanyl is one of the number one killers in our country. And
Yeah.
that's
So
across the southern border via the southern border from China.
Yeah, so the migration stops when you don't have the open border policy. We've seen that in the past, but this current administration wants to destroy this nation. They want to flood it with people. I mean, no one has a real answer as to what their ultimate goal is to flood the country. Is it to have enough voters? No one has any real answers to that. I've spoken to a lot of experts. Like, what would be the reasoning to flood our country with all these people?
Right. I guess nobody really knows the ultimate game plan
Yeah. What's
because
the ultimate goal there? Correct.
what's the end game with it? Again, I love these conversations for this reason. One, I'll get the feedback from some people. I've got
Okay.
some great listeners that I've got some great listeners that are galvanized, on the things on the right, and I've got some Democrat listeners who'll come in and they'll give me some feedback, and I've got some everyday people that are like, well, that was kind of crazy thinking, but it's true. And that's actually what we hear about a lot. Like, people are aware of the drug trafficking, they're aware of the human sex trafficking, they're aware of election integrity, which I'm asking about next. They're aware of all these things, but they kind of are so busy with their day-to-day lives that because these things don't fit in a narrative that is very calmly or packaged in a very pleasing way, it must be conspiracy. If it's not pleasing to the ear, or it's outside the box, it's got to be conspiracy thinking. But when there's smoke, there's fire, and
Yeah.
and and that's one way to look at this because I've looked at the statistics. Look, I didn't. My eyes weren't really open to the border crisis. I mean, they were open to the border crisis, but they weren't open to the real reason for it until I met somebody that has 600 acres of land on the border. And he
Wow.
says, no, I've got video cameras of them bringing children over daily, where one person will be bringing over 20, 30 little girls.
Wow.
And he told me the stories he put on the radar, and then I started researching it. So, like, in today's world, people want to see the answer in one meme, or they want to see one news report that says, here's the reason, and that's they need. But when they hear people like yourself that are passionate about things that they shrugged it off as conspiracy instead of saying, hey, look, let me look into that. And
Well,
that's what you're trying to bring to the table.
another thing that people need to realize is that there were a large percentage sent back, and you can watch people being sent back all night long over the bridge, but 50% of those people get kidnapped once they go into Mexico. So this is not humane to come across and potentially be gone forever, to the cartel. So all this needs to be fixed and quick.
Well,
It's an incredibly wrong and horrific thing that's happening. And I really think with a new administration and then packing the House during the next term, we'll be able to solve these problems.
very good. Election integrity. I've noticed that on your website here.
Yeah. Well, people don't realize that elections are tampered with even at the local level.
Mhm.
The Republican Party, since I've been involved, I've seen outcomes be changed, albeit ballot stuffing, throwing ballots away. If they control the method of nomination or they control the election like a firehouse primary, they will choose the candidate. In many instances, it is not honest, and I have seen that. I have been on the other end of that, and it's I just again, like you don't realize how dishonest people are, but it's about power and it's not about people to them. And then of course at the federal level, we have to reclaim our elections.
Absolutely.
The American people have been lied to. We have a completely broken court system. Anyone who has ever been involved with civil court or criminal court can tell you this. Um, and there's data and there's evidence for all the things that happened. And the question is, um, if we have another election, if it isn't fixed, will we have the true outcome? Or are we going to be back where we are?
Well, I know it's interesting. I've been doing a lot of things on election integrity, and I don't know if I told you this or not, but I went to Mike Lindell's symposium.
Oh,
I,
cool.
I met with a lot of the people that are on the election integrity stuff. I've interviewed actually on my show for the people that are working with Mike Lindell on this on my show. I've had Wendy Rogers, I've had Pat Colbeck, I've had David Clements, and I've had Doug Frank on my show. And it amazes me how I will listen to my Republican friends. That would, of course, I'm putting everything into all the examples into one story. But I have Republican friends who will joke about in Chicago, the dead vote, or they'll joke
Mhm.
about, elections that were stolen or election fraud. But then when it comes up to the last election, the last presidential election, if you dare say you think it was stolen or the
Yeah.
wrong person got in, they'll call you a conspiracy theorist.
Well, listen, people need to realize, and I spoke out about this before, the Democrats were doing the same exact thing. Bernie won in 2016 against Hillary. There was massive election fraud. There was manipulation of the voter machines. There was massive ballot stuffing. But Bernie just laid down. He didn't fight back, you know?
Well,
And I spoke out about this in 2016. I mean, the data was there.
And one of the things I've noticed is I'll say, everybody says the Democrats cheat. I've always said there's many Republicans that let them get away with it. And I don't want to cast stones like that. I'm not, again, I'm not referring to all Republicans. I'm saying we're talking about the small section of the far right or the far left that's been able to, control the narratives on some things. And I've got a lot of friends who are just these average people, not average people, but they, anything that's outside the box, you're looked at as, oh, where are you getting that false information from? Because again, they want to see it in a meme or in a one-page report that says this happened and we found that it happens. It's a lot of extra
But
work.
see, we've had the evidence, but nobody wants to hear it, and it has been suppressed. So we are living in complete government tyranny right now. We are living really in a complete communist regime, and people are so busy surviving that they're not fighting back. And I know a lot of Republicans are tired of hearing about the last election, and they're complaining about Donald Trump talking about it still. But how will we ever have fair and honest elections if the voter machines are manipulated, dead people are voting, the number counts don't add up? You know, our vote should matter. We have
Yeah,
a
and I always
voice.
tell people, I said, like my Republican friends who are never Trumpers. I have some Republican friends who are never Trumpers, and they don't care that it's like they ignore they ignore any type of election integrity because they were just happy that Trump didn't win. But when I look at, let me give you my example. I don't know if I told you tonight. I ran for office 3 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
I ran for state representative. And when it originally got on my radar that our elections, how easy our elections could get tampered with, I was knocking door to door, and I had the Secretary of State's most current election, a list of registered voters on there. And when I go up to the door and the names are wrong, addresses were wrong, the amount of voters in the House were wrong. And I'm not saying 100%. I'm saying, it was 20% maybe at some points. When I saw that, I kind of went, ooh, I kind of backed off of it. But then when I went to the Michael Lindell Symposium and I met with groups that are canvassing, knocking on door to door all around the country, and they're reporting the exact same thing. They're reporting things that I saw, and I know you got to go in a minute, so don't worry. I'm make sure that.
I know you're good. No, well, I mean, it's some common sense stuff. Clean up the voter rolls, take the dead people off, use your ID to vote. You have to have your ID to get a library book. I think it's an incredibly discriminatory thing for Democrats to say that Black people don't have IDs. I mean, that's kind of disgusting. And they're using that, I mean, these are some really simple common sense things.
But to finish what I was saying, though, so when I saw that the across the country that people are canvassing and finding all the discrepancies in the voter rolls, and then I started matching that with the stories of ballot harvesting, how people are harvesting ballots to be able to fill out mail-in ballots or fill in absentee ballots, and those are the ballots that are getting used and stuffed in the ballot boxes, and people don't realize that they would ignore that it could happen, especially with some attorney friends who are like, oh, that's not possible. Well, it is possible because the judges don't want to disenfranchise anybody's votes. They don't take a chance that, hey, these 1,000 votes that were turned in at the after hours or were dropped off, they could be wrong. They don't want to say, they don't even entertain that they could be wrong. They just count on, because the fact is they don't want a chance disenfranchising somebody. That's a whole other story. Let's talk more about you, because we have to wrap up here in a couple of minutes, because you've got and 8 o'clock at your time, you're an hour ahead of Central. So veterans, you got on here, veterans. Obviously, it's an important issue for you.
Yeah, it's incredibly important. 80% of our veterans are injured or have some type of trauma, and they have given everything to us. A lot of times their families have been broken up, and a lot of this is a policy fix. Right now, the veteran suicide rate is higher than the murder rate, and common sense policy can fix this. As far as suicide is concerned, nothing has really worked. Right now in the House, there's been a bill introduced. It's a signatory act. It basically educates an individual who's going to be taking different medications to let them know what the side effects are. The federal law states that before you take a medication, you're supposed to be told the side effects. It has not really been happening. They'd be able to read through a form and sign it so they know. There's been a study recently done on the relationship between the medications that they're taking and suicide, and it looks like there's a correlation. There was also some funding put in that went through in order to help with the funding on this research, but there has to be actionable items. Executive Order 27 was in for 2 years. Trump initiated that. It needs to be extended, and those are actionable items to deal with veteran housing and veteran suicide. There's so much work that has to be done. There are so many different issues. It's a huge issue. And again, explain to me why we can take care of 150 different countries, but we can't take care of the people who have fought for our freedoms. So I'm really passionate about that.
I love hearing that. So we got, I know we got about 5 minutes left or actually, hopefully about 8 minutes.
I'm good. I can stay till about a minute till 8.
Okay, all right. So we've got I'm looking at your plans. You've got community revitalization.
Correct. So there's a lot of creative solutions to fixing our communities. And the reality is, in a lot of these rural areas, it's been completely ignored. My goal is to hire someone on my team just to do community revitalization. I'm going to make sure that they can pull in grants into the community, clean up the corruption that's going on. What we've seen in a lot of these little towns is a lot of embezzlement of taxpayer dollars that needs to go back out into our communities so we can have drug addiction treatment centers, so that way we can have community centers. I mean, this stuff just makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't even have treatment programs for drugs in our schools because a lot of the school boards are not allowing students to learn about opioids or fentanyl, methamphetamines. Instead, they're learning about marijuana and alcohol. And that's not useful. That's not necessarily the big thing that we should be talking about. So I'm working with some people to make sure we get those programs in our school. And then a study was done in Virginia. They found children in every school that they studied had been trafficked. And so there's got to be some type of trafficking prevention of our children. And that is something that's definitely not addressed enough. And I've partnered with a lot of people in all my travels, and I need someone on my team to help me implement all of those programs, whether it's housing programs, job programs like bringing in greenhouses, bringing in businesses. And a lot of this still does take policy on top of it. So I think it's a slightly different approach to really pull someone in that you have full time just to deal with these issues. And that's what we need to do because for far too long, these communities have been ignored, and it is wrong, and they deserve a good life.
Well, what I like that you said, what I really like is that you said bringing communities together. I love that, and I love the whole education thing. I get excited about when we talk about community and
Good.
education because you're right. A lot of our children are falling prey to drugs because they haven't been educated on them,
Right.
and they're talking about marijuana and alcohol, but they're not talking about the real killer right now, which is
Yeah. What's
opioids,
really killing?
opioids that are laced with fentanyl. What would you
Correct.
what would you do about jobs? I see jobs as being a plans. It's something that every politician says usually,
Mhm.
but talk to me about what your plan for jobs would be.
Sure. So I have a greenhouse project, which I think is going to be a multi-county project. It actually will bring revenue to the counties and also bring good-paying jobs. Um, I have manufacturing jobs. I'm working with someone who is making computer chips here in America. But as a thought for what to make those out of, I would like to see them use organically produced graphene. Graphene is a semiconductor. We can take over leftover farm products and we can convert that into a very strong product that's way more affordable than how it's currently available. So
Mhm.
that's several different manufacturing plants. I would like to see our farmers start diversifying industrial hemp. Industrial hemp has a lot of processes, from toilet paper to flooring to building, etc. I think that the market got flooded with CBD and CBG oils, and I think that's not where our focus needs to be. So I'm working with a lot of people on business plans and proposals for that. I have a modular housing program. It's a modular house that's affordable. We've got a housing crisis right now. We can get the cost per square foot down of houses that we can put up really quickly, along with community programs, and that will bring jobs as well. I'd really like, well, I've met a lot of people with a lot of money over the
Yeah.
last year, but
Well,
the thing about them is that they have a heart for community and a heart for people, and they're willing to come into my communities to invest. So I have people willing to come in and revitalize our communities, bring in businesses like coffee shops. I would like to see a ski resort. We're in the mountains. A ski resort would bring tourism. Lots of other different businesses would pop up around it. We're thinking about a compost type of business too, and reclaiming our minds. I mean, there's just so many creative solutions.
what's interesting is that a lot of your ideas are very rural. and that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing because your area is rural, of course.
Correct.
It's common sense, but there's so many rural areas across our country that might not be thinking about some of your ideas. So you might be able to help your individual district with that rural
Correctly.
thinking.
So
But how
one
many
of
other
the ideas is that
you know,
we want replicable, reproducible programs that we could do in Virginia. And I'm really so thankful for the people I've met along my journey who can come in and help me with these issues. But I have to win my seat in order to do this, because I've been running around advocating for my community out of my heart. It's not like a paid job. It's because I see the problems and I want to solve them.
yeah,
So I got to get in, and I think it's going to be a big surprise. I don't think that they know how to mobilize voters, and I think we're going to come and take this seat.
you're working to mobilize some voters.
Heck yeah.
So and that's like I said, and that's the good thing about the grassroots. I mean, you're motivating people to be involved in the system, and I think that's like very important. And I love hearing that, and I love hearing your forward thinking that you're trying to circulate or coordinate your policies around your area that can be replicated. Is the word I was trying to look for.
Correct.
To go for. I see domestic violence on your website. What would you say something about that?
Yeah, so I'm a survivor of domestic violence, and there are definitely not laws out there that help necessarily. When we talk about domestic violence, we don't consider coercive control or the damage that can be done through family courts, through the law system, through credit card companies. You'd be surprised that someone can steal your credit card, and they can steal 3 credit cards and put over 20,000 on them, and you can go to the sheriff's office and they won't take a report because it's familial fraud. The credit card company won't deal with it because it's familial fraud, and then all of a sudden you're stiff with this large debt, and you always have creditors coming after you. um, there needs to be credit repair, because in abusive situations your credit will be destroyed. There's it's affecting more people than you realize, and men are also abused. I think that's a really important issue, and there are policies currently that are not addressing men's issues where they're being abused, like the Violence Against Women's Act does not consider the abuse of boys or girls, so they don't have the resources they need. And what we do know is that children who are abused end up in the same pattern. So we need to make sure that we can stop this in our society by making sure that we have the funding, and the funding is there. It just needs to be redirected and addressed. And there's a lot of things that are currently in that just need to be modified.
Kimberly, it sounds like you're just an everyday old person that's just like the average American that has a little bit more passion to be able to get in there and try to do something for the average person like yourself.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, so 7:55, we're okay. I need help to win my seat.
I have my next interview at 7 o'clock. So I have another show at 7 o'clock.
Okay, cool. So you can find me at www.kimberlylowe.com. That's KIMBERLYLOWE.com.
Okay.
Listen, I'm going to be really loud in Congress, and whatever I do is going to affect you in your backyard. And I'm going to go up there and fight. There's a lot of policy we've got to fix, from the border to, I mean, our banking system, the housing crisis. There's a huge plethora of issues. We didn't even talk about the family issues that we have. And I'm one of the few people in this country fighting to reform the family courts and the child welfare system. And that's a really huge one. So if anyone wants to come knock on doors in May in my district, particularly if you're passionate about something like maybe family court reform,
Right.
we're going to have like a big family court reform group. Come out in May and knock on doors.
I love it. So
Thanks.
KimberlyLowe.com, right?
Yes, thank you.
Kimberly, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank
Like
you
I
for
said,
having me.
like I said, you're just one of those everyday people that's got some passion and bringing up some things that even if people don't agree with, I think it brings out the conversation to help us in other ways and maybe bring about better ideas, but also help make other candidates better candidates to where our country becomes a better country in the event that our good ones don't get through, right?
Thank you. Yeah.
Kimberly, Well, thank you very much. I'm going to talk to you soon. I'll give you a call
Okay.
later on,
Thank
and
you.
more soon. I want to keep up with the campaign. All right.
All right. Thanks. Bye, guys.
Great night.
Bye.